Ask the Podcast Coach for July 17th, 2021.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means it's Saturday morning. That means it's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, and joining me right over there is the one and only Jim Cullison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Happy Disneyland opening day. Today in 1955, Disneyland changed the world, I think, in a lot of ways. Today was the day they opened in 1955.
It's the happiest place on earth, unless, of course, you work there, from what I hear.
Well, allegedly.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
Yeah, my niece worked there for many years, and she had a good time. It's one of those things where, as you might imagine, with any job, there are times when they want all hands on deck, and it doesn't matter how many hours you've worked or whatever. It's one of those things. But if I was tired at work, you know what I would do?
Maybe pour some coffee.
Pour some coffee.
Hey, did you see? I got the new. I actually brought the
pot
perk down here. Yeah.
There we go. And I forgot that. There we go. It's like, where's the coffee sound? But yeah, that pour is brought to you by our friend Mark over at podcastbranding.co. If you need any kind of artwork, so if you need a logo, or if you need artwork for your podcast, or if you want artwork for your episodes, anything that you just want to look professional, Mark is the guy to go to, because number one, he's an award-winning graphic artist, but he's also a podcaster, and you don't realize how cool that is until you work with somebody who's not a podcaster, and you have to explain, no, it needs to be square and that whole 9 yards. And so if you need any kind of artwork, but also, what if you don't have a website? Well, you can go over to Mark and he will build an entire website for you that's built, again, for podcasters. So if you're looking to look professional, ramp up your branding, go over and check out Mark. He can even give you an audit and kind of figure out where you are and then get you where you need to go. So if you want to look good, if you want to look professional, then you want to go over and check out Mark at podcastbranding.co.
Cappuccino, hold the phone. Take me home.
And Jim, that is a very cool mug you got going.
Hotter than I thought. Yeah. When I went into it, Dan Lefebvre is the mug sponsor here for the next month, so at least as long as he wants to do it for. Based on a True Story podcast. You can find that at basedonatruestorypodcast.com. And if you're interested in history, but it's really around movies. So think of The Last Samurai. And then Dan has on an expert, a historian from that time period, and they talk about how true was that, to history was that. So Band of Brothers, think about all those historical movies that we have out there. Check it out. And you want to make sure based on a true story podcast.com. Thanks, Dan, for your.
That's a cool looking logo too.
Listen, Dan really did a nice job. I mean, if we're talking about podcast gear, stuff you sell or make available, merch, right? As the YouTubers call it, merch. This mug, when it came in, it's super impressive. When it came in the mail this week, I pulled it out. It's one of those insulated coffee mugs.
Nice.
Gold. It's not showing up super great because of the lighting in here, but without a handle, my hand covers it, from time to time. So I got to kind of work on that. But Dan, nice job on the merch. This is a nice mug. So appreciate that.
Awesome. And I was out looking at the Facebook groups today. That's where I usually go out and get questions. And of course, if you have a question and you're watching us live at askthepodcastcoach.com/live, you can throw your question in the chat room. If you go out to askthepodcastcoach.com/join, you will join us right here in the video. And right now we have nobody listening in Clubhouse, but if you were there, you could raise your hand. But I saw in a Facebook group, Don Fuller said, I need audio help. I'm 20 episodes in, and I'm not doing a good job of staying even on the mic, so my volume is all over the place. When I normalize, probably half my content is good volume, and then I turn away, and my volume is just way too low. My high is already peaking, meaning high, the level of this audio is already peaking, so I can't just amplify it. What process do you use to level a single speaker on one track? I primarily use Audacity. I also have Hindenburg. And this is something I think it's one of those things where I've been doing it so long, Jim, you've been doing it so long that we kind of probably forgot that this is something we had to learn, and that is our good friend mic technique.
Mm-hmm.
I was so happy. It actually made my weekend last night. I have a client of mine that has great content, and I couldn't really get him to press record, and he did. And it was so fun to listen because his first kind of crack at an episode, he was very stiff, and he did sent me 3 different episodes. And by the third one, it just sounded like he was just talking across the table. But there was a thing where his volume was a little low, actually it was a lot low. And I was like, okay, here's a couple things. But if you're having varying audio levels, I don't think that's a software problem. That's a human problem. That's what happens a lot, especially with guests, is you tell them to get on the mic and they do, and then they get comfortable and they sit back in their chair. And it's like, oh, yeah. So that's that. Do you run into that problem, Jim, when you do interviews?
Well, and we're trying to get more folks on headphones, or on a headset,
yeah.
just to eliminate that. I did an interview on Friday, just yesterday, and I had to deal with a mic, like with a laptop mic, and fortunately the interview is 4 minutes, so it's not going to be that big of a deal. But it is hard, I think, for some folks. A windscreen is a great way, I think, to practice this mic technique. So even if you need it or you don't, get that windscreen out to a level where your sound is great, where you like it, and then practice coming up to that windscreen all the time. Eventually it's like training wheels. I think eventually you can remove the windscreen, but it just gives you it gives you a place to land your voice. The other thing, Dave, on this with technique, you have to hear what you actually sound like. This is where a audio device or coming back through on a mixer, as we route that back, you've got to have a clear, you got to hear in your monitors clearly what you sound like, so that if you pull away from it, like, okay, this sounds different than this sounds, right?
Yeah.
And so I have to be monitoring that in real time. So
yeah, that's where headphones come in to play, even if it's just earbuds, something. And also if I'm doing an interview, I would say something like, hey, just so you know, you want to stay up on the microphone. And if it's a case where they can see me, I would say, if I do something like this and I'm doing a hand motion to move closer to the mic, that's what this means, is move closer to the mic, so that they know it's important. And I'm going to coach you if you start backing away and you see me do this. We had a couple, when I was in a band, we had different hand signals, and they made no sense. But one was the singer would take his 2 fingers and kind of roll them over each other, and that meant speed up. And then likewise, this meant speed down or slow down or whatever. So if you have some little hand gestures, that just lets them know that, hey, it's important that you're up on the microphone. And then from there, there's always Auphonic. Auphonic is great for leveling things out. There is one thing that I'm slowly starting to notice, and it actually slows things down. And that is, you almost have to go into your recording and squash these first before you level it out. And that is breaths in Auphonic. I've noticed a couple of times where I've taken a file, run it through Auphonic, people turn into Darth Vader. Because it's like, well, Dave, it was kind of like, and what, it really wasn't that loud, but unfortunately Auphonic heard and thought it was a word, and it really boosted up. So you almost have to go in and throw in a noise gate or something so that anything that is quiet is really quiet.
Mm-hmm. That happens to me on this show sometimes when you run it through Auphonic. If it's depending on the recording levels, if it's trying to bring me up, like when you run it through Auphonic, if I'm significantly lower than you to Auphonic, when it tries to bring me up, that's when it really amplifies the breath that I take on it. And I do try to pull away, but it would look funny to be like talk, 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 talk.
Yeah,
that is kind of funny. I do for a lot of years I used a headset mic, and I kind of learned to start breathing out the other side of my mouth, the non-microphone side, and I've caught myself doing that, like on the phone at work or whatever. Breathing out the side just so you don't get the breath. So
you look like Stallone.
Yeah, hey, you gotta wake up, punch me in the gut, right?
It's not how many times you get hit, it's how many times you get up. Kim says I've almost quit using Auphonic for that same reason. Yeah. It's a cool tool. This will make my day. Thomas Taylor says, "Hey guys, last week I said I have no idea what I'm doing, so I just signed up for the School of Podcasting. Well, holy cow! Looking forward to the courses. So yeah, you'll see it, Thomas. It's fun because I think I still have the first one in there. I'm redoing those videos, and I think I took the original one that was it was called "Failure to Plan is Planning to Fail." And it was so old that A, the video was square, not 16 by 9, and B, my hair was black. And
I remember those days. It wasn't that long ago.
yeah, and so I've been slowly kind of scaling those back, adding some new things. And the other thing I wish I could do on video, and I don't know how to fix this, is the fact that I have a Hitler mustache. It's driving me nuts. I have one spot under my nose. Everything else is turned gray. Now I have a little gray on, like I have black on my mustache in other places, but for whatever reason, I haven't grown any gray in the very front. And it looks like, we'll say Charlie Chaplin instead. I don't really particularly like comparing myself to Hitler, but it's one of those things where I just need to perpetually be thinking and going, I'm not sure about that. Yeah. So,
well, you can, they have like reverse just for men. Right,
yeah.
Where it turns it gray instead of making.
That's
it
what
black.
I need.
Because you'd want to stay. You'd probably the rest of your beard's gray. So
yeah.
Well, have you gotten any feedback on that? Has anybody sent you a note to say, or is it just your own observation?
No, it was Evo Terra, my buddy, was on the Podcasters Roundtable, and he goes, "Dave,
good old Evo,
what is up with this?" And I go, "Dude, I'm telling you, I wish I could fix it." I go, "It's either dye the rest of my mustache black." Or get some gray dye. Who dyes their hair gray? I mean, that's the problem.
Well, but in this case, maybe just a little bit. Maybe there's some.
And the other thing is, if you see me under normal lighting, it's not this prevalent. But for some reason, under the bright lights of the podcast studio, it really accents the fact that I look like Charlie Chaplin. So, Coach Dave says the single up and down is strong. I suspect the result of some new screening censorship algorithm. I'm getting none of this show, but the chat. Oh, so he's having a technical issue hearing us. I thought he was talking about the fact that the signal up and down. So
anybody else having trouble? I'm not experiencing any trouble here. So
yeah,
sometimes it's a local thing. Sometimes, whatever. I wouldn't suspect. I mean, you could kind of think that of YouTube. I don't know if they would make an implementation of heavy that quickly. They kind of. Google likes to slide things in where you just don't really know what's going on. So
Kyle Bondo has a great idea. It's time to just have me dye everything platinum blonde.
There you go.
That's it.
That would be so messy. Like, I just can't imagine doing that.
Dude, I started dyeing my hair when I was like 24.
Really?
Yeah, because
the jet black was days.
It was jet black from it was always jet black. It just come 19 is when I got my first gray hair, and then shortly after I got married, I don't know if that's a coincidence or not, the gray started coming in, and then I just was like, I looked at my older brother, my older cousin, and I said, "How are you guys not turning gray?" And I am, and they went, "We dye our hair," and I went, "Oh," and so and then I had. That I really started dyeing when I got married the second time. She did not want to apparently be married to somebody who had gray hair. I don't know.
Yikes. I hope it's not that bad. Thomas says he watched the first course intro and your hair was black and it looked like you were using the ATR or the
2100.
Yeah. 2100.
Yeah.
Would you say, like, in podcasting, let's just say, when did you think you made that first course? How long ago do you think that was? How old do you think that
I was above the deli. Course. I was still in Cleveland because I've redone that a few times. So that was, I've been divorced 3 years, probably. Okay. So this is 2021. That would make it 2018, man. And I was with her for 8 years, probably 2010.
So it's been 12 years.
Yeah.
Do you think since 2010 podcasting, like the concepts, the technology, there's been plenty of changes in the technology, but the concepts, what do you cover? What's in the first, what's in the intro?
The planning your podcast. And we've heard me do this on the show. Why are you doing it? And on all of these are kind of deep dives. Who are you? The planning your podcast really just beats you over the head of who are you talking to? So it's why am I doing this? Who is my target audience? And then there's some things about what makes you different. There's a thing called an idea matrix that, and actually someday I may we need to talk Strengths Finder. Maybe we'll do that today.
Yeah. I got the shirt
Identifying your strengths. So like I just say, like, what do you like to do? What do you think you're good at? What do other people think you're good at? And then what do you hate? And it's like, okay, so here's some ideas because the whole point of it is not just starting a podcast, but how do I do a podcast that doesn't burn me out? Like,
Right.
that kind of thing. And just play to your strength. If you're not, if comedy is not your specialty, then maybe you do something a little more straight to the point kind of thing, but that's primarily that. And then you get into where you're going to podcast. We talk about formats, the pros and cons of each. I have to go in and look, but there's a lot. The Planning Your Podcast course has more sections in it than any other podcast.
But probably hasn't changed, right? Much?
No, not really. And that's why it was there, because I'd go in, I'm like, oh, this is still relevant.
Yeah.
And then the one day I was like, wow, I had I'd grabbed one of those backgrounds that folds out, and it was white, and it just was grainy. It was before I had a C920. I don't know what mic or what camera I had, but I just looked at it and went, that's not a good first impression.
Yeah.
So that's when I started redoing these, and then doing these
change, right? Things, hairstyles, some of those could dress, whatever, kind of thing. But
it's funny. I have one shirt. It's my video shirt. And it's got a collar on it, and it's got white stripes. It's black, and so that way it's always Dave in a black and white shirt. But he changes a lot, and then plus I'm 30 pounds heavier than I was in 2010. Yeah,
it happens. Yeah.
So
I guess the point I was trying to make, the information I think around podcasting really hasn't changed that much. There's some things in there, different techniques, different technologies, some of the other kinds of things, but creating content, I think, is still very similar. We might say, I think in one of the podcast groups this week, I saw somebody was like, quit saying people don't have a long attention span. They'll binge watch Netflix. Yeah. They'll watch a 4-hour video on YouTube. Critical Role, I mentioned, is one of the very, very popular podcasts that's 4 hours long. So, I think there's some things we think that might have changed, but I think I don't know if people really change. I think it's just more of staying the same.
Yeah, I researched that because so many reports said we have the attention span shorter than a goldfish. And when I looked into that and actually dug into it, that was made popular by a certain post that was referring to another post. And in that post, in the end, that's like, it's just been blown out of proportion, and it's not true, basically.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, but it's been reported so many times that people think it's true, and nobody went back to look at the original document that brought up that point. And I just watched 6 episodes on Hulu. It's Rick Rubin interviewing Paul McCartney. And I binged it when I got done with episode 6, I was like, where's the next one? I'm like, that's it. I was like, that's it? Come on.
I know.
It was really, really good.
I just binged all seasons of Ted Lasso a couple weeks ago. I went through and watched, I think it's 10. And, it's 5 hours, 5 or 6 hours. Yeah, I don't buy it. I don't, Dave, I think if any podcast guru or any of these gurus are like, yeah, you got to make them on YouTube, it's got to be 7 minutes, or on, you got to be whatever, on podcasting, it's got to be under 20, whatever. No, I don't think any of that's actually true.
See, Daniel has the thing that I've been saying. I don't think we have shorter attention spans. I think we have an increased level to understand when something is going to waste our time. That's what's better. So if I start to watch something and I'm like, I'm out. I'm quicker to say I'm out. So it looks like I have a shorter attention span, but what I really did was I was able to identify, this isn't going to give me anything that I want. I'm out of here.
Oh, come on, Dave. We've all done this on YouTube, where we go down the YouTube rabbit hole and we watch senseless, stupid things. I'm agreeing and disagreeing on that. Like, I think we just have the ability to go through things faster or more access to things. I don't know if we've necessarily changed anything with that. I think we've always had short attention spans. I think we've always had this discerning ability to move on from one thing to the next. It's just been replaced with our phones or whatever.
But if I'm going down a rabbit hole, it's because what I'm watching is holding my attention, right? Or it's somehow stimulating me, because otherwise I turn
Maybe.
it off.
Maybe like
'Cause I
I've
just
watched some dumb stuff that I get to the end. I'm like, why did I was there's a volcano erupting in Iceland right now. Not particularly exciting. Like, I mean, it is, but it's not. And I've watched this morning. I got up at 6 because I couldn't sleep, and I bet I watched an hour of those. If I really looked at them, I'd kind of be like, yeah, that's not particularly riveting. But for some reason, I stuck to it and went down the rabbit hole. That guy got my attention for whatever reason.
Well, that's a great example of when I talk about storytelling. One of the keys is you want to keep people wondering what's going to happen next, especially if there's some stakes involved. If Jim, if the gas runs out on the generator, then Jim will have no electricity. And so Jim wasn't sure what was going to happen. And so as you start to tell that story, you're like, was he going to run out of gas? So it keeps you there. Cause I've done I remember the one night it was like 3 a.m. and I looked up and I was like, holy cow, it's 3 a.m. I'm like, how did I end up at California Jam 77 watching Ted Nugent? And it's fun to go back and watch your history. And then you're like, well, in all of those, it was like, especially with something for me, I'm starting to notice, especially as I'm watching these old documentaries, when you see your heroes, for lack of a better phrase, people you looked up to, it's amazing how that makes you feel. Because on one hand, it's fun, especially with music. There's a great documentary. I wish I could remember the name of it, but they played music to Alzheimer's patients, and a lot of times it really stimulated their memories and things like that. But it also makes you kind of sad when you see your heroes and you're like, wait, that dude's 78.
Oh, I know.
It's like, ugh. But
well, the I guess the point in all of this is make content that's interesting for you, and I think others will find it interesting, right? I mean, this is one of those areas you were talking about strengths. I mean, like this guy this volcanic eruption that I was watching, it was a German guy. His name, I think, is Guten Tag Live or something like that, right? and
Dita.
Exactly, Otto. So they and all he was doing was filming. It was bad, like wind, but he was in Iceland, like feet from this. Apparently there's no safety features going, no safety happening in Iceland right now. Like, there's people crawling all over this active volcano that's going on there right now. In Hawaii, they shut the whole state down, like when that thing was erupting. But apparently in Iceland, they're not too worried about safety. So, but he was right there and he's talking, and he was interested. And was it great, compelling, riveting? No, but he was there, and it was, so this is one of those kinds of things. I think we have to take advantage of opportunities when we have them. I've watched all kinds of YouTube videos of folks doing interesting things that not the most interesting things for other people, but I was interested in it and they were interested in it. And I think that makes a big difference.
I'm stealing, because I am going to talk about some of these documentaries on the School of Podcasting, but one of the reasons the Beatles started writing their own songs, they were bored. And they were playing these hole in the wall clubs in Germany, and they were playing all this, Bo Diddley and Chuck Berry and all this stuff, and they were just like, and they said it was interesting because you would learn, like, it wasn't like you didn't have Spotify, and like somebody would buy a new album because you couldn't afford it, and like they said, oh, but George had that album, so we started playing this guy. But they said they finally were like, they were playing like 2 to 4 hours a night. Apparently they played twice in one day, and they said, we just got to the point where, like, I cannot play that song anymore. And I've been there. Mustang Sally, although I like Mustang Sally, Brown Eyed Girl, I could live with not playing that one again. So they just started writing their own stuff. And then as they got older, they started experimenting more in the studio, because again, they were kind of like, well, we've already done the hold your hand thing. Let's do something different. So, and I think that comes through with a podcast. I think if you're bored with your content, I think eventually that's going to come through, because you're going to kind of have that time to make the donuts attitude going on. Does anybody know what that, like, we know what that means? I always wonder, like, if like some poor 23-year-old kid is like, why do people say time to make the donuts? Because they've never seen that commercial.
No. You can find it on YouTube though, if you want to. Yeah. That's like, where's the beef, right? If you want to remember that one. There's
Clara
also
Parker. That's the sad thing. I remember the woman's name.
If you want to go down a rabbit hole, there's commercials that are inappropriate today.
Oh,
like commercials from the 60s and 70s, 50s, 60s and 70s where you just go, seriously, that thing was on TV? I almost think they're making it up, but no.
One of my favorites is it's Fred Flintstone and Barney, and they're pitching cigarettes. It was like, what? And like, that was real. Yeah. Remember the ones where the woman of the house had poured, the man of the house coffee, and he would say something and she'd be like, well, and he'd be all mad, like, how dare you serve me that coffee? And you'd hear this voice inside her head. It's weird. Bill never gets mad when I serve him Folgers or whatever it was. It was
right.
But it was this whole thing of like, must serve the man, make sure the man is happy. And I was like, yeah, that's not going to work today.
No, but so to get back to the point. I think I really do. Like, I think even for podcasters today, and I've thought about this a lot with my tech podcast of like, how can we're coming up on episode 500, and you're kind of thinking like, every time we do a milestone, I start thinking like, okay, is this thing done? Like, have I really done enough of this? And it's a current, it's current news podcast. So there's always new things coming out.
Right. But
I keep thinking like, okay, how do I do this in a way that I like it? Because if I'm going to be there, I better like this thing.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of see a transition where I've gotten less worried about the content and more worried about the guest and having a good, having fun on the podcast, like with it. Because if I'm going to do it for 2 hours, I might as well have fun doing it. So I think for existing podcasters, it's a great idea to just kind of take a look and say, am I dreading this, or are there aspects of it that I don't like? Am I just doing it because I think everybody expects it to be done that way? And I think sometimes longevity lasts when you really figure it out in a way that works for you. And if it's not working for you, stop doing it.
Yeah.
Quit.
Well, and it's one of those times we don't do that because we're afraid, well, if I change this and start doing this, then I might lose some listeners. Yeah. And you might gain some too. Yeah. It's like, it's,
that's such a good point, Dave. Like, in losing some, you may gain more, but we got to get over that fear of, I could lose 15. Yeah. You could gain 30. Yeah. So give it a try.
I forget. I was listening to a book, I think by Joel Osteen, who I affectionately refer to as the Happy Jesus Man. And he was explaining how his dad was making some changes at church to make things a little more like same message, just a little different packaging. And the old curmudgeons were like, that's not the way we do church. And he went, well, it is now. And they're like, well, we're going to leave. And he's like, it's been nice knowing you. There it is. And he lost some people and some new people came in. It's like, so, do what's going to work for you. Cause in the end, if you, it's like you said, if you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. Well, it's not like your podcast shouldn't be torture. It's like,
you start doing weird things where you record it and then it sits for a week or two and you don't edit it, or it's done except the show notes because you hate writing show notes, or you don't have any guests lined up. You're a guest interview show. You don't have any guests lined up, and those are all like signs of like, okay, maybe I'm not as interested in this thing. Or there's just other things. Sometimes there's other things in life that become a priority. Children are a perfect example of that, right? A new job, a new routine.
Aging parents.
Oh yeah. No, right. My brother retired to take care of my mom. Like he took an early retirement and was like, yeah, I need to do that now. And if he had a podcast, he would probably retire from that as well, So it's just sometimes life gets in the way. Let it, back it off, slow it down, let it breathe, let it take a rest.
I'm working on an episode right now and I can't believe how I love to take something and go, here's what podcasters can learn from this. And I can't believe I've never done this. One of my favorite books is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's a great book. It's 25 years old, 25 million copies, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, why have I not taken the 7 habits and shoehorned it into a podcast? And one of those is put first things first. And I mean, Daniel J. Lewis in the chat room is a great example of that. he backed away from his podcast temporarily to raise his kid. Who is going to argue with that? Like, seriously, who is going to go, wait, what? You stopped to raise your son? What were you think? No, you're supposed to do that. That's, I think it was Chris Rock did a routine. He's like, you're supposed to love your kids. It's like, we shouldn't have to tell people to do that.
No, right on. Yeah, take an inventory. I mean, if you've been doing this a while, take an inventory. Probably 95% of the folks that listen to us, Dave, are existing podcasters. They come out for the entertainment, and take an inventory and be like, is this really what is, and then are there some changes that I could make that would make it more fun for me? And I'll be honest, at 500, we're 3 or 4 weeks away from that, whatever it is. I think 3 weeks. I kind of want to think like, okay, how do I make the next 500 even more fun than the first 500 were? And I've had a blast getting to 500. I mean, it's been an absolute blast. But how do I do it in a way that continues to be more fun? For me, what I've learned, I have a cadre of guests that just keep coming back. They know the show, but they're not on every week. They're maybe on 3 times a year, twice a year, whatever. And that makes it super easy for me. They know what I'm looking for. They know what the show is like, but they don't have to do this every week. And they love it when they come on, right? If they, sometimes when you're doing this week in and week out, you're kind of like, I got to do this again tonight. Yeah. And so having this cadre of guests has been a breath of fresh air for me. It's been something I've been working on for 6 years, maybe, of building up that cadre. So pretty great.
Kyle has a great point. He says, pod fading is a journey, not a destination.
Yeah.
Sometimes your podcast has to end before something better can begin. There you go. And then Coach Dave is asking, Jim, how much of your shift in focus is woo, personality strength talking? Do we shift towards our core once we master the? Is that a typo? Venue,
maybe.
Or is that a Strengths Finder thing?
No.
Oh, venue. But, I see.
There we go. Yeah, maybe. Maybe. I don't know if I can do that kind of analysis on my personality that way. I just do like. During the pandemic, I spent a bunch of time by myself down here, and then did a lot of this one-on-one, you and me on video. And I kind of found out that I like this kind of conversation better than I like being in person in big meetings or whatever. Like, I'm way more effective working with people one-on-one than I was in a group or big groups like church, right? I'm good at that. I'm not as good at these like team 10, 4 to 15. I get really awkward in those. I realize like I get real awkward. So yeah, I'm gonna focus a little bit more on the one-on-one or maybe a group of 3. So Coach Dave, yeah, I certainly over the last year that's kind of taught me I'm much better at this, doing it this way, and a little less woo, a little more relator if we want to talk about Clifton strengths in that way.
Well, the other thing that I never get tired of doing, it's never boring, and that, of course, is thanking our awesome supporters. Can
I get a little more coffee before we thank them? So just look at that nice shiny. This thing spills pretty easy, so I got to be careful. But
I'm making my own coffee sound here because
thanks for the mug, Dan.
I'm on a different button. My coffee pour is on screen number 1.
You know what? This one doesn't make the noise like the other one does. So even when I'm pouring it, yeah, it's super quiet.
Yeah, it is really quiet.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to get prop failure.
But we always would help if I share my screen. I'm over here like, okay. We always want to thank James over at the podcast Dog Network. Yeah, or the Dog Podcast Network. Find him at dogpodcastnetwork.com. He's got all sorts of short shows, long shows, tall shows. I can't talk. My mouth has gone away, apparently. It's podcasts for dog lovers, and they've got a contest going over there. You can actually win up to $5,000. Check it out at why do I want to say Podcast Dog Network? I'm very dyslexic this morning. Dogpodcastnetwork.com. And then we do have, this is why I had to switch screens. That's right. We have a new patron. So if you want me to talk about your show, that's an option. This is KJST Media. It's an I got to get this right, LGBTQ plus founded company focused on helping all levels of podcasts to grow their podcast, regardless of what you're looking for. We're there to help. You can find them at KJST Media. And then our $20 supporters are awesome people like edsullivan.com, at soniccupcake.com. So if you need an editor, go over and check out Ed. Felix over at the Latin Podcast Awards. It's dedicated to enhancing the visibility of Latinx podcasts around the world. He's been doing this since 2017. Find him at latinpodcastawards.com. Glenn the Geek Hebert, who will be in Ohio very, very soon. I'm looking forward to that. We're taking Glenn and anybody else who shows up to Luigi's Pizza. That's going to be interesting because Luigi's doesn't hold that many people. And they don't take reservations, so that's going to be fun. HorseRadioNetwork.com. If you like horses, go see Glenn. Max Trescott up in the air at AviationNewsTalk.com. So if you're a pilot and like all things flying, check out Max. Michael Delaney over at Baby Mountain Radio Productions, where podcasting and hard work are made fun. Find him at BabyMountainRadio.com. Brock over at the Occupied Podcast. This is for occupational therapy. You can find him at OccupiedPodcast.com. Kim Craggy over at Toastmasters101.net. So if you're looking to develop your voice or your editing time or improve your content, check it out, Toastmasters101.net. Greg over at Debt Shepherd, where he's teaching financial wellness. So if you need to get your finances in line, you can check him out at debtshepherd.com. Shane at spybrary.com. So all things spying and I don't know why I always think of Mad Magazine and Spy versus Spy when I think about Spybrary. But if you like spy stuff, check it out, spybrary.com. Greg over at the indiedropin.com. If you've got a true crime or a comedy or a scary story, you can send him an episode and he will actually has a whole website there. He basically has an audience and you put it over there and it gets in front of, and you don't have to change your RSS feed or anything like that. It's just another venue of people who like that kind of stuff, and you just go, oh, here's an episode to put that in there. So when you think about that, make sure you mention your website in your podcast episode. So if you'd like to be an awesome supporter or go see our $10 supporters, go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome, or if you want to die, I cannot talk today. If you want to die, day book, I'm talking like Eddie Murphy doing buckwheat. You can go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/store. That's where Dan sponsored the mug, as well as many other ways to support the show. Just go to askthepodcastcoach.com/store. And in reality, I need to change that to askthepodcastcoach.com/support. It would sound better. Support the show.
Store has less letters, though.
Yes, that's true. Less typing. So thank you to all our awesome supporters. And let's, you know what? Hold on a second. Diane's laughing. She's like, because I said Ed Sullivan. I love that guy in your show with the spinning plates. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Really good show. Really, really, really big show. Really big.
He had some sort of
sure
weird,
he's never heard that joke.
Never.
Times.
Well, the other thing with Ed Sullivan is he always, like if you watch the clip where he goes, the Beatles, he kind of like, he had some sort, he had the lead guitar player from Motley Crue has this as well. And basically your back becomes one big giant fused mess. And that's why Ed Sullivan was kind of this weird like posture and all. He had, I forget the name, spondylitis, because we had on the podcast review show.
It'll be a miracle if you pull this one out.
No, I just remember spondylitis, because there's a podcast about it. Of course there is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Because they call it Spondy for short, whatever it is. Angulitis, spondylitis, snuffleupagus, something, I forget.
How do we go down this rabbit hole?
I know. Ed Sullivan.
Ed Sullivan. All right. I
but can you do strengths finders in 15 minutes, like a quick overview, or 20 minutes, whatever we have left here?
Sure. Yeah, let's talk. We're kind of changing it. It's been known as Strengths Finder. We're changing the name to Clifton Strengths over the years. So I'll refer to it as Clifton Strengths. But I mean, from a podcasting standpoint, if you want to really get a good look at kind of the talents that you bring to your craft, Clifton Strengths is made up of 34 identifiable themes of these talents. We've grouped the talents into these theme names, things like learner and activator and woo, that was mentioned earlier. That actually stands for winning over others. And so you get these talent themes that have these constructs underneath them of what am I good at? And it kind of goes back, you hear me talk about this a lot on this show, is focusing more on areas where you've had success, or you're successful, or you have a great time doing it. Oftentimes, you've been successful at things in the past because you enjoy them, right? You enjoy doing them. Everybody likes to do winners, things that are easy for them. And so, taking this assessment, 177 paired questions, takes about 30 minutes. You can go to cliftonstrengths.com if you want to if you want to sign up for that. It takes $20, super cheap. And then it starts to give you, and it's a system you work with for a while, Dave. It's not a one and done. It's something that I think I've memorized my top 5. But and that's for the initial report. That's what you get. You get of the 34 in order, you get the top 5, and then a bunch of resources around them. At work, this is all I podcast about. So I get the opportunity to talk about strengths and people doing great things. I mean, how great is that to have a podcast where you get to talk about people doing great things with, right? I mean, that's super positive. So Dave, it's really just a framework. It's a methodology. We have 10,000 certified coaches around the world to help with this, but it is one of those areas where if you're kind of struggling to know, like, where should I focus my time? I love all the stuff from Franklin Covey and the Know the Why, Simon Sinek,
Right.
and the 7 Habits. I love all that stuff, but sometimes we don't know. Okay, so what do we point at that? Clifton Strengths can be a real help in figuring out some of those, what we do, how we do it, type deal. So there you go. How's that?
Yeah, and is that a case where in some cases somebody who doesn't like to do, I don't know, show notes, or is there something where like, oh, well, your strength is better fitted for doing this type of show kind of thing?
Yeah, well, so as an example, say I have high strategic thinking talents, right? I high analytical, or high strategic, or high context. Well, that made me better at planning or preparing or thinking about, where are we going to go with this podcast? What are we going to do with it? What's the overarching, the big picture kinds of things? That may mean I struggle, and it's not necessarily, by the way. Like it's different for everybody. So there's no one size fits all. But let's just say, as an example, well, okay, so maybe I struggle a little bit on the execution side. The editing, the show notes writing, some of those kinds of things. As you look at your talent makeup, you may start thinking like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Like, I'm a high activator. I like to get things started, but as a kid, I was a terrible finisher. I just was, right? So as an adult, now I have to finish things. Like, I can't just say, nope, terrible finisher, never going to do it. Like, there are times I have to get things done. So I've created some systems. I also have this theme called a ranger, which means I like to have a lot of things going on all at the same time. I'm best when I have 100 things going on at once. When I have one thing going on, oh man, I lose focus. I know it sounds weird, but
right.
I have trouble focusing when I have one thing to focus on. Give me 20 things to focus on, and all of a sudden things lock in, right? That's just part of the talent. So yeah, it's you start looking at your podcast workflow, gives you an opportunity to go, okay, I've got these talent themes. How have I had success with them in the past, or what could I have success with them in the future? Maybe I should do more of these, and then outsource, if you can, outsource some of the things that you're not good at. That's kind of the philosophy behind it.
Well, that's it. And that's where Coach Dave is saying each of us have a mix of strengths. Teams have mixes, finding the right mix, amplifying, optimizing. Good to have a vocabulary around this. So yeah, he says, I use Clifton Strengths in my context, from managements to family discussions.
Yeah.
Thumbs up for the conversations it sparked over the years. Yeah, absolutely. So
that's where my daughter's big in it for the family. So we've all taken it here, and yeah, I should be too. But my daughter's actually more excited than me, and we have family conversations about it all the time.
Yeah, I could see where, especially if you have, let's say you have either one co-host or multiple co-hosts, maybe you have a panel, you could figure out which strength each person have, and then say, look, let's let you'll be the planner and this and that. I'm going to be the creative person. I'm going to do this or that. So,
well, on Home Gadget Geeks, Mike Mike Uyghur, my co-host, much more analytical. Now he has some forward-facing charisma, right? Woo and some of those kinds of things that he's really good at it. But he thinks through things. He's a lawyer, so he thinks through things a little deeper than I do. So knowing that, I rely on him for when we need to think through something. I rely on him for it.
Yeah, Randy in the chat room says connecting with Mike on your show made an impact. The banter between the two of you, for a guy not nearly as techie as either of you, it's entertaining. So there you go.
Well, we have a tech show that isn't. I mean, yeah, it gets technical sometimes, but it's not. It's for the average guy. So we try not to get too nerdy with it, but we try to keep it at a level where anybody could jump in and be able to have kind of the conversations with us around some of those tech things that are hard to do. So even in Mike and I's, Dave, in our relationship, you and I, as we've gotten to know each other on this, we know there are things that I'm good at, and there's things that you're good at, and we play to those. We've been doing this long enough now that we kind of know, okay, we get a technology question, Jim's going to nerd out on that thing, right? You're perfectly comfortable with that, right? And so it's just again, from a Clifton Strength standpoint, it's just a framework to kind of help kind of figure some of those things out.
Yeah. So it might be something you're interested in. You might learn something about yourself. Again, you just go to CliftonStrengths.com.
Clifton Strengths. Yeah. Clifton. Clifton, Don Clifton, the founder of this. This is named now for him as a legacy. But he had this idea that, I wonder what would happen if we focused on what people were good at. Instead of, remember, this was an era of the 70s of self-help. If you were bad at something, if you just put enough practice time into it, you could master it. Well, we know that doesn't really work very well. If you look at Michael Jordan's career, or you look at he tried baseball, he kind of got there, but he was never pro. Came back to basketball and won more championships. So, it's just a good way to kind of think through just some good stuff to kind of think through for yourself and get some self-awareness.
Yeah. And then the name of your show is, I'm going to guess, Strengths Finder.
Well, the Gallup ones.
Yeah.
Actually, so they're designed for coaches. So it's the whole umbrella over them all is called to Coach. Called to Coach. And so I have to say that slow. That's one of those, Dave, where I've said it so many times, called to Coach. You say that and like, what? Wait a minute. What? So because we have 10,000 certified coaches around the world, and I knew I could reach them through a podcast. And somebody said, well, maybe these people are called to coach.
I would be very tempted to buy the domain Call the Coach.
Yeah.
Or call to, I could see if you say that fast enough, the ED disappear.
Yeah.
It goes from called to call, because they both make sense. Call the coach, because we're about coaching, so you need to call the coach. And
if you want to see it, it's all on Gallup.com. So if you go to Gallup.com/Clifton Strengths, all one word, you can see we have tons of resources that are available. You can see that. But if you Google "call to coach" or put my name in, you'll see all the ridiculous. I've done thousands of these things at Gallup now, so
nice.
lots of stuff out there.
Coach Dave says, how many podcasters, I wonder, have invested the time to really profile their ideal listener, their routine, their lifestyle, their strengths, their problems they have? Again, my bumper sticker for this is spend $100 on a microphone and 100 hours getting to know your audience. And people go, well, do you mean like 100 hours? And I'm like, yeah, like if you did 4 hours a day, that's 20 hours a week. If you don't work on the weekends, that's basically a month of you spending time to figure out what your audience wants. I don't think that's a ridiculous amount of time, and you're going to find something there that go, oh, okay, that's, that would work. And I did see that question when I was out in the Facebook groups. It's interesting how this is what I'm seeing. This is the kind of question. How do I write my script for the podcast? It's like, okay, I've got my microphone, I've got a record button, I've got Audacity, and we can talk about that with the whole Russian thing if we want to. But I don't know how to start. And for me, it's like, we'll start off with welcome to the blah, blah, blah show where we blah, blah, blah. So you can blah, blah, blah. I'm like, that's, it's I think sometimes we're overthinking it, and and then what do you want to talk about? There's a great book called, the something about dynamics content by Ken Davis. And half of the book is about speaking life, but the first half is all about boiling down whatever you want to say into a single sentence. I think I've talked about this before, and just hit record and just realize that whatever you do, we talk about this, I think, every week. Probably whatever you record, you're going to throw away. The
early ones anyway.
the new student that sent me something last night, I was so happy. He's got either a ground loop or something going on with his phone but he, like, in between his recordings, he's got this high pitched and I'm like, you might want to look into a PodTrack P4, because recording on your computer, something's going on. And sometimes you can't get rid of that really horrible video we were talking about with me and my black hair.
Mm-hmm.
When I listen to it, it's faint, but in the back, and I was like, huh. So sometimes you just have bad wiring in there. So, but the whole, like, how do I script the beginning? I was like, at some point you just have to start.
Yeah, when you challenged me on this, when we first started doing this, we talked about this, and I remember rethinking my intros. At the time, I changed Home Gadget Geeks to be news, reviews, product updates, and conversation, all for the average tech guy. Now, that's something I've said hundreds of times now because of it. But I actually structured my show notes for a while around that. So I'd have news. I'd open a Google Doc and I'd type in news, enter, reviews, enter, news, reviews, product updates, and then conversation. And we actually structured the show, and we still kind of do that way. But it gave me a framework from which to hang the content on. And then, by the way, my intro would then match the content of what we were talking about. On the Gallup podcast, let's see if I can do this midstream. Call to Coach is a resource for those that want to help others discover and use their strengths, right? And then here's the purpose. We interview independent coaches and inside experts to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. So it gets you this context of, what are we doing here? Well, we're interviewing experts,
right,
for coaches, right? And but I worked on that. Like, I worked on those sayings a lot, in writing them. Then I practice them a lot too.
Well, and that's great, because if I'm not a coach and I hear this is for coaches, I know instantly, I'm in the wrong room.
Yeah.
And it's not that that's bad. Like, no, this isn't for me. I'm looking for the show about, airplanes or horses or spies or whatever,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, for both those who want to listen to it and those coming to it, to say, okay, I found the right place. I found that repetition, that very first last week, I showed that picture of when I podcasted in the middle of the conference. And when I started the intro, the crowd went wild. Yeah. And because I say the intro the same every single time, right? And I think there's some value in doing that. I think there's some value in having a very strong intro that you host read every time, but that's similar. That's kind of one time in Home Gadget Geeks, we do the weather. So I say, broadcasting live from the AverageGuy.tv studios here in a beautiful Bellevue, Nebraska. Mike, it's the same, and I go to him with the weather, right? One time I just blew right through that, and somebody in chat was like, whoa, where's the weather update? And so you people start getting conditioned for that. So I don't think there's a bad, even for regular podcasters, I'd take a look at, like, what's your first 3 minutes? And it can be banter as long as it's structured banter.
Right.
Right. So,
well, I remember when Jimmy Fallon shortened up his intro, and half of it was cutting out the whole hey by the Roots, and it was like hey, and it was like they cut it to like 4 seconds, and I was like, that was one of those that got your toe tapping, had some energy. Kyle in the chat room says, I podcast about blank to people who blank. Yep. Yeah. That's it.
I like the idea of writing that intro, then practicing it a bunch and get it in your own voice. Like, get the cadence right so you can say it. Don't be awkward. I go back and listen when I first wrote that intro on episode 1. It's totally different than it is today, and it wasn't in my voice yet. So continue to tweak it and try things. The ones that drive me nuts is like, hello everybody. Here we go. I've got some news I haven't seen you in a couple weeks. Got some news for you. And you're like, did you just hit play? I mean, was there any planning that went into this thing at all? Are you, do you have a plan? Are we going somewhere with this thing? So those drive me crazy.
Yeah. Coach Dave says he took a few weeks, but a
Yeah.
solid investment trying to understand my listener, which is a nonprofit member. Yep, absolutely. The more, the more you know your audience, the more you know what they need. The more you give them what they need, the more they like you. The more they like you, it just kind of keeps adding on and adding on. So
I asked my audience one time what they liked and didn't like about the intro. And one of the guys says, I have no idea what you're saying. So I went back and listened to it, and the music was too loud when I said news, reviews, product updates, and conversation. One, I was saying it too fast.
right.
Two, the music was blaring through it, right? And so, make sure they can understand what you're saying. Go slow enough that they can understand it.
Yeah. Coach Dave says, I add, don't be afraid to change it. Yeah. Don't be afraid to change the first 3 minutes. Here's the one thing I changed mine. I started opening up with a cold open, and I notice now that people don't skip my opening. They just, it goes, but boy, the minute I say, hey, thanks so much for tuning in, it's a waterfall. The minute I let people know the show's over, they're bailing like nobody's business. He's changed it several times until you find what works and flows best. I changed mine many times during the first 100 episodes. Yep. Not a big deal. It's your
One
show.
time, what for a call to coach, I always have, I have these phrases that give a verbal indication of where we're at in the show. And one of them is, well, with that, we'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources. That's a phrase I say all the time. And then one time I said that phrase and then I stopped and I went, don't turn me off. I have some important things to say to you. I said that in the thing. I got a couple bits of feedback on that. They were like, oh, well, thanks for reminding me. I need to, because it can be the same. It also can be different. And you can shake things up a little bit. Even if you're doing the same stuff, you can phrase it differently so people it's not getting too routine.
Yeah, I actually had a question from Facebook. This was from Karen. She says, I have an interview style podcast and I wonder if I'm not getting to the good stuff soon enough. When I see that, I'm like, the answer is probably, yeah, you're not. I spend the first 90 seconds of the show guest in intro and 8-ish minutes out of 50 to 60 spent on broad overview questions, setting them up as an expert. I'm toying with the thought of adding a juicy expert to hook the listener. First, I do have show notes that outline the key concepts we were discussing. I'm not sure if the hook is needed. If I do I do this if my intro music would be before the hook or after? So the first thing when I see that, if I tune into Jim's show and Jim says, hey, today we're going to interview Karen Smith, that's all I need to know if that person is an expert, because I trust Jim. I it's always nice, and you always kind of say Karen is the blah blah. She's the grand poobah of the blah blah blah. Yada, and I'm like, okay, so you have to kind of explain who she is and why she's on the show. But I think a lot of people worry about, I really have to establish the credit of my guest, and I'm like, for me, and this is just my opinion, if they're on your show, I trust the host to not bring on somebody who sucks. I don't know. Is that just me, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree with you, Dave. I it's got me thinking. I'm always, every time we start talking about this subject, it gets me thinking. Maybe in post show we can talk we can get really practical with it. I got some. Maybe I'll take some opinions from the chat room of because it always seems like the live folks love it when we get really, really super practical with this. So as we think about that, I want to think through my intro, and I want to get some feedback. Last time I did this, by the way, Kim told me to create a video for my about page, and I never did it. So Kim, sorry, still haven't done that yet. But maybe we'll talk some in the post show about it.
I need to create a video for the Patreon page. I realized it went over there. It's like, I don't have a video like, hey, give me money, give me some money, kind of thing. So, but it is about that time. Holy cow!
Yeah, it goes fast, doesn't it?
And I'm there. We go. I'm like, where's the music? I'm like, oh, you know why? Because I'm on the wrong page. I'm like, that's the theme to the podcast rodeo show.
It's like, that doesn't sound like.
I'm like, that doesn't sound like Ask the Podcast Coach. That's why this is live. And for some reason, because I'm playing, I'm like, why won't this let me go to the first page? There we go. And
riveting podcast.
It is. This is the stuff that you don't get to hear in the edited version. Holy cow! I can't believe it's 11:30 already. But there we go. We'll start fading in the music here. And yeah, we can get our nerd on and we'll beat up your intro or whatever you need. And of course,
Yeah.
anybody, we're always here if you want to say, hey, here's my intro. What do you think of it? Somebody asked me the other day, like, what is the show? And I'm like, it's free podcast consulting, basically with two friends chatting with a bunch of people in the chat. But in between that, we talk about podcasting. So Jim, what is coming up on theaverageguy.tv?
Yeah, we spent a whole episode talking about tech horror stories. So things that break, home automation that doesn't work. We kind of get off my lawn for most of the show. So if you want if you're looking for two grumpy guys talking about tech, I haven't released it yet, but it'll be released a little bit later today at theaverageguy.tv.
I spent 2 hours trying to get a smart switch to work. It fell off the network and I couldn't get it. And I eventually dawned on me, I could just get up and like turn the switch on the lamp.
Yeah.
That would
smash it with a hammer and then just go turn it on.
Yeah. It was like, holy cow. On the School of Podcasting, I think what I'm going to do is I watched a bunch of musician documentaries. Like I watched the Paul McCartney interview on Hulu. I'm in the middle of watching a Kiss documentary on A&E, and there's some really good points in there that I was like, ooh, podcasters should follow that example. So it's probably going to be one of those Dave compares podcasting to something else kind of episodes that I like to do. But it'll be fun because I'll have to explain what the Beatles were. I just dawned on me that there are people like, 22, and you go, yeah, he was in the Beatles. And they go, okay, what were they again? Like, really? Really? Seriously? So, but thanks to the chat room. Stick around. We got some more information coming up. And if you're new to the show, we're here every Saturday. Stick around for some post-show. Take it away, Jim.
Have I said how awesome this mug is? Dan, thanks for this mug. Yeah, I'm based on a true story podcast.com.
There we go.
Yeah.
Nice.
I was just super impressed. Like when you send something to somebody, usually for this kind of thing, I mean, he could have done the typical ceramic mug kind of thing. But when I pulled this out, my first impression out of the box, and I'm not lying here, I pulled this thing out of the box, I was like, wow. And then, it's like one of those insulated Yeti type things. And I'm like, God, this should be a great, in the future, for me to use outside, if I'm going to enjoy an adult beverage out there or anything. So Dan, thanks it's super classy. I think I would have gone for this show. I think I would have made that black. It's just so it shows up because we lose it about there type deal. One of those kinds of things, but that's why I'm making up for it today.
So is it gray? Is that why
it's gold?
Oh, really?
I think it's gold. Yeah, I think it's like a silverish gold type thing. It's just reflective, so it's hard, but based on a true story podcast.com. So
there we go.
So so I had this thought in the show, like, should I, and I've thought about this for a long time, 500 would be a good time to do this. Should I spend an extra moment in pulling out a pull quote, an audio pull quote from the show and putting that up front? I've heard podcasters, I think Harry does that on his, and I've heard some other podcasters. Dave, what do you think about, I start my show, the tech show today with this is the Average Guy Network, and you have found Home Gadget Geek, show number whatever, and then the date. Okay, that goes back, I took that from Leo Laporte back, 11 years ago when he was, I thought, it's important to put the show number and the date so people know where they're at.
Right.
Do you think it's more important that I get the best quote from the person I'm interviewing or from the show itself to kind of tease it, to pull them in?
Here's why I don't like that episode. I love the idea, but here's why why I wouldn't do that. It's inefficient because unless you're editing it, and as you're editing out ums or whatever, and you go, here's the clip. The problem is it takes you, if it's an hour-long, interview, you've got to listen to it for an hour, listening for that 15-second clip, and then it has to be a clip. Because I've heard clips where it's like, welcome to the, Binky and the Wiz show. Today we're talking with, Sven, whoever. And then it's like Sven, and he's like, yeah, and that's when my mother was wearing the blue dress. And you're like, okay, but like, did that really suck me in? Like, they just pull a clip because I need a clip. And
Yeah.
a good clip should make you want to hear more, or holy cow, I want to hear that, something like that. And I think the time it takes to find the perfect clip is dwarfed if you just said, hey, today I'm talking with Sven and he talks about the time when he fell off a mountain and lived, or whatever it is, something like, whoa, I want to hear that. So that's my only worry about that particular. I love it when it's done well. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
Jordan Harbinger is a guy that does that really well. I just know for me, I'm like, man, that's got to take a lot of time to find the right clip that's going to get people, that A, is fairly short, and then B, is going to pull people in to want to hear more. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, Fred says, what about getting a bumper from the other person? Sorry, my HelloFresh just got delivered, so you're probably hearing those alerts. Yeah, I could do it. I've toyed with the idea of having Mike read it. I mean, after I've done it 500 times, I could have Mike read the opening. I'm just not sure how valuable today that knowing the show number and the date is. I always thought it was important because people scroll through their podcast players, and if they're listening to an old one, but I kind of agree with you, Dave, that I kind of wondering if that is just an old thing. Like, I did last week when we had Rich Hay on, when I said 496, his eyes got really big. He was like, wow. Like I watched that show number have a reaction to him. And now he's a podcaster, and so he understands what it means to do, 500 of these things. But it kind of got me thinking to scrap that part, maybe introduce myself down. So we would do a poll audio quote opening, then do the music. And how important is having a music bumper? Like, again, I think it has a Pavlovian effect to a podcast. When you say, hit it, ladies, like, to me, I know it helps me know I'm in the right place. Like I kind of wait for it. But Dave, after 500, I've used the same opening music for 500 songs. Do I pull it? Do I leave it? I don't know. What do you think?
I would keep it. It's really part of your, I mean, if I went boom, bum, 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 that's, is that Intel?
Intel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun.
So it's an audio brand thing. So if you change that, it's like changing the name of your show, even though you're not changing the name of your show. Daniel says, I often hear teaser clips that should be much shorter. Yeah, I had one where I thought the guy just started the show.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the music came in. I was
15
like, oh,
seconds, maybe, right? It's the right 15 seconds. Do you think is kind of the right thing to shoot for?
Yeah. People are saying if it's a new show, you might want to include the date. A short summary is a teaser as the beginning is good.
Laporte reads it like he after the show, he records his opening. So he'll be like, hey, here on Windows Weekly, the one I listen to, we've got Paul talking about this and Mary Jo brings this up and, oh man, Microsoft did this. That's all recorded post. I've watched him do that in the live show, and he records his intro at the end because you know what you're talking about. I never had that skill. I could never sit down and do that. I wanted to, but I never had that skill. So I think I'm going to try pulling an audio quote and see what people think.
Yeah, Craig says tech shows or news shows are more time sensitive, so they might need the date.
Yeah.
So
maybe I just here on Home Gadget Geeks, this is what I say. Here on Home Gadget Geeks, we cover all the favorite tech gadgets that find their way in your home, right? News, reviews, product updates. I said that earlier. And then I say I'm your host, Jim Collison, broadcasting live from the Average Guy TV studios. Maybe in that spot, I can sneak the date in, or something along those lines. Just quickly get it in there, or the episode number or something, so people know.
Yeah. And then I'm going to say Stefan says, anybody want to use AI to create podcast episodes? I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. I mean, I know there's the thing that Daniel hooked me on to, Jarvis, conversion.ai, that I use on occasion. Like I used it on my last episode to write the first paragraph. I really like it. I've seen it work really good. I've also seen it do things that I've used it to make descriptions for other people. and it'll say things like, this course is blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, but they don't have a course. So it's AI. It's not always going to be great. What I love about AI is a lot of times it's not, I don't use the exact words that it spit out, but what it did was it triggered me and I went, ooh, that's an interesting way to think about that. So a lot of times I will use Jarvis to come up with a few items and then like, ooh, okay, I'm not going to use any of these, but I'm going to take some of this and some of that and some of this and some of that. I don't know. Jim, do you play much with any kind of AI?
Well, just what we get out of Otter for the transcripts.
Yeah.
I don't listen. I don't think computers are that smart yet. If we're worried about them taking over the world, I think we have a long way to go before they're even ready to take over just a few processes. So I think we have a ways to go on that. We at Gallup work really intense with Otter, and it's got. We do some hardcore edits to the transcripts. We do them a combination of doing them online and offline. In other words, we take the transcripts out as well. In it, AI has some problems. If it's really AI, I'm not sure there's a big difference between what an algorithm is and what people are calling AI. So let's just be really clear on that one. But it doesn't, like, if I change, it's supposed to learn, what I say, and then in learn what you say, your voice print, and then be able to make intelligent edits. But if I make a small change, if it guessed me and it was really you, and I make that change, it tries to go back through and change everything. And oftentimes that creates more confusion. And so the editing of transcripts using their AI on Otter is not always the best. And my editor at work is super picky about things being right. So he spends hours sometimes fixing those transcripts to make sure they're perfect. Not so sure the AI is working the way it's supposed to over there at Otter at times.
Yeah. Stefan's saying it's AI to select the pieces, all to summarize longer text and create the text, and then AI voiced.
Stefan, if you find somebody that's actually doing that well, right? Because that was the promise of what's that? Audio Burst. That was the promise of Audio Burst, that they would use AI to find smaller parts that made sense. That has never worked. Never.
Yeah, and the other thing is, look, I have a service right now that converts text to audio because I have a couple newsletters that I like to read, but except I hate to read newsletters, but I would love to listen to it while I walk around the block. And it's not bad. But you can have the woman in the tube read a book on, a Kindle book to you. Mm-hmm. And after a while, it's like an accent. It kind of fades away, but it's not human, and it's not there yet. And I don't know, to me,
it's not AI either. It's just a voice reading. That's not AI, right?
Yeah. And it's also, one of the things that pulls people in is your personality. Right. And, what's her name from Amazon has a personality. She's a bit of a dork at times, but, but they also, you just had a show about it. They also get it wrong a lot. I know I have a routine that at 5:30 on Friday, she says, hey, it's, you've made it to the weekend, and she's supposed to play some sort of uplifting music, and it's usually country. And I'm like, okay, how do I change that? Because for me, it, bing, 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 ding, 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 ding. I'm like, nope, that's not how I want to start my weekend. So,
Descript may be a different animal, by the way. They're doing some really interesting things. So they may be getting it more right than most. Now, I haven't messed with it. I really need to dig into Descript and to figure that thing out, because I hear good things about it.
That's me. I was thinking about that today in the shower. I'm like, I'm hearing more people say how they use it to create their podcast. Right. And for the record, the whole remove filler words, the last two times I've used that, I'm at the part where I'm like, oh, that was actually kind of a bad edit. Yeah. Where it cuts out, and I was like, right. And I don't want to have to go, because literally there are times when it's like, I found 280 filler words, and I'm like, I don't want to have to go keep, delete, keep, delete. And granted, some people might say, well, that's still faster than, and I'm like, not by much. And so, but I've heard people really say how, that's great. So, but I did see Pat Flynn talking about, Descript, and I forget what it's called. There's a thing where you can read this thing for 10 minutes and it will then use your voice to where you can type things and then your voice will read it.
Mhm.
It was definitely not human. Pretty doggone close though. And that's the part where I'm like, that's spooky. When you can make me say stuff that I didn't say, that's where I'm like, we probably shouldn't go any further down that
Yeah.
that
Yeah, well, the deep fakes for both
yeah.
audio and video they're getting better. That's for sure. The deep fake stuff on video is incredible. Like what they can superimpose somebody's face on somebody else's face. You
Yeah.
know, you're like, I think I saw Tom who's Magnum PI?
Tom Selleck.
Tom Selleck on top of Harrison Ford's face because he was supposed to play Raiders of the Lost Ark
Right.
in that he was supposed to be Indiana Jones. So they superimpose that, and holy cow, is that good? You're like, oh, that may actually pass. You know?
I've seen Bill Hader is a guy that does a lot of great voices,
Yep.
and
Yep.
Jay something that was on Saturday Night Live, and they'll show clips of him on Conan, and it'll say deep fake.
Yeah.
And when you like the one guy was doing Kevin Hart, and they kind of morphed Jay's face with Kevin Hart, it was amazing. And I was like, that's kind of spooky in a way. That's one of those like, oh, that's cool. And I'm like, as long as you use it for good, you know. That's
Yeah.
when you like when you say, you know, honey, that's not me in the video. Honest, that's not me. Things could get really sticky
What's
there.
going to be believable and what's not?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's what Coach Dave is saying. He says, won't be too many years before we're unable to distinguish. And when we lose what the truth is, game over, kids. That's where you're like,
We've already lost the truth.
yeah.
That's that game was up a long time ago,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Yeah.
Here was an interesting question I saw, if I can find it. This was from Ty in a Facebook group. I think this was out of Podcast Movement. How much would a marketing consultant be, and would it be worth it for a podcast? And so that's where I always go, before you go marketing your podcast, have you found somebody who is not related to you, listen to it, and say, wow, this is a great podcast? Because otherwise promoting it is kind of, not great.
Yeah, I'd get some coaching on the content first and then marketing second.
Yeah. And then the whole, how much does it cost? Because there are some people that take that, and it's not really, it's true. If you charge too little, people won't hire you because they're like, well, that person can't be any good because she's only charging this or he's only
Right.
charging that. So they'll raise their price. And then there's some people that take that to an extreme, and they're like, oh, if I want to be seen as the biggest of, smarty pants, I'm going to charge $1,000 an hour. And I'm like, see if that person has a podcast before you go hiring somebody that's charging you $600 an hour. See if they have a podcast, and check with their testimonials and things like that. Because there are people that, kind of do that. But I think
always better to set them high and pull them back
Yeah.
than to set them too low to begin with, right? You can always discount off your published rate. It's really tough to raise prices once you've published them. So there you go.
Yeah. So I think with any consultant, because boy, there are tons out there. That's for sure. Both podcasting and that's the thing. I always think it's funny when somebody goes, does anybody know a marketing consultant, or does anybody know a graphic, or a branding expert? I'm like, have you heard of this thing called Google?
Yeah, but there's a ton of them. Like I
Yeah.
think they're just looking for a recommendation.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
That's where word of mouth is important on that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think they're just looking. There's so many, and nobody wants to be taken. That's one of those things where you're like, I really don't want to be taken on this one.
Yeah, that's it. I don't want to spend a bunch of money and get nothing for it. So interesting. The other thing I found this week, we haven't talked about that. We haven't talked about the whole Audacity thing.
No, we haven't. That's because they totally reversed it.
Yeah, it's what was interesting, and what it is Audacity, which is open source, was acquired, which
Right.
we're still trying to figure out how that works, by a company that apparently is based out of Russia. And then, according to the feed, a draft version of their terms of service was somehow discovered. And according to them, what that terms of service wasn't supposed to be public yet. And It doesn't apply to any current version. So that you're kind of like that. And then what they said to is what they said to Rob. They sent Rob an actual thing that said, "Hey, we're going to capture your IP address in one little snippet, and you can turn this off in preferences, because apparently the reason they do that is they're checking to see if there's an update available or something like that." And that's when I went, yeah, but an IP address is one of those things that can be used for a lot. And that's where James Cridlin was talking about this in Podland. He goes, realize if you're doing a show, let's say about homosexuality, and you live in Russia, and they take your IP address and tie your podcast, that's illegal in Russia. And that's where I went, oh, that's spooky in a way. So I'm still kind of like, I've heard some people say, Rob said, look, read the terms of service. Like they even say you're not allowed to use it unless you're over 13. And I was like, how do you do that on the internet? Which I thought was interesting. And so Rob was like, read the terms of service. It doesn't sound like they're, gathering a ton of information and then selling it, but they are grabbing your IP address. And he's like, if you want to turn that off, I don't know. This is where, do we need to have you nerd out on this, Jim?
No, I don't want it. Not on this one. This was a weird.
It is weird.
They stepped in a big pile. Like they did some things thinking nobody would notice.
Right.
And everybody noticed.
Yeah.
And then they were like, oh, well, that's not what we meant, kind of thing. And there's, he said, she said, kind of things went back and forth and all this kind of stuff. Probably some of the best free marketing that Audacity has ever gotten on this thing. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if this whole thing was a setup for that. Like, in other words, they did this on purpose to get to get everybody all riled up over it. And that's a risk. You run a risk because the open source community is super touchy. If you ever want to get into a community that's really touchy about things, that open source community, holy moly, do not just tread gently in that community. And so, you run some risks there, but man, I think just about the free advertisement, Audacity had really, for the most part, been kind of stopped talking about. I mean, people used it, we used it, but there wasn't a ton of stuff. It's not like it was a conversation. It became a conversation in almost every podcast I listened to during that time. So kudos to them. You want to do some marketing? There you go.
Well, I still don't quite get, like, when they say now that if you're going to contribute code to it, you have to fill out some paperwork.
Yeah, I don't know all the ins and outs of that
and
either.
There are just some things that I was like, but that's not how open source works. So, and that's where I don't.
No, it can work that way. They own that fork of it, right?
That's it.
They own that fork. And if you want to contribute, listen, Microsoft has put bunches of things. Google Chromium is open source in a lot of. But if you're going to, you can't just have anybody submitting everything, right? There has to be a process from which that, and who owns that fork has to say, no, we're going to say who can and who can't, and some of those kinds of things. So, it may have been,
because otherwise it'd be anarchy and chaos if everybody could just.
Oh yeah. And Daniel says, open source only means that the source is open, and that's exactly right. In other words, I can use it. That code can be forked. I could take, and I think there was some talk of this I could take the Audacity code, fork it, and create my own version of it. And I think there were some folks who were talking about, okay, fine, if you're going to do this, we're going to fork it and continue on. Well, okay, now if you're going to do that, you have to commit to keeping up maintenance on it, and be careful what you wish for in some of that, because you own the rights to, or you own the responsibility to make sure it stays updated and is secure and all those kinds. Nobody's putting malware in it, that kind of stuff.
Well, that and just the downloads of people downloading, it's like, I was listening to Podcasting 2.0, and they've that's about a year old now. They're coming up on a year, and already their server bill is, $300-400, I think it was, maybe close to $5. And I was like, that's going to be interesting as this starts to pick up steam. They're doing the whole value for value thing. I'm like, but I guess when you say, hey, if you like this is going to go away if you don't contribute, that might get some people to.
I think if you're worried about Audacity now and you have an old version, just don't update it. and
Yeah.
and you're fine.
There you go.
At this point.
Problem solved. Yeah, because it's been stable for, I remember in the early days of podcasting, it was everybody had Audacity crashed and I lost everything. I haven't heard about one of those in a while. It's every software will eventually, bite the bullet every now and then, and you need to restart or whatever. So we shall see. Diane says, I don't understand the podcasting 2.0 thing. It's two things. One, it's taking RSS and updating it so that there are more options. So you could have a field for, hey, if you have transcripts, here's where they are. And then the hope is that apps will adapt these options so that you'll be in the app and go, oh, I want to see the transcript. Click a button. So things like that. There are a ton of these. One of them is having the ability to have multiple versions of your audio. So if you have a low bit rate version, and I'm in Africa where bandwidth is ridiculously expensive and hard to come by, I could have the app say, based on your location, and that's another thing they're adding to it. So they're just saying, look, RSS is the backbone of podcasting, and we're all going, hey, Apple, can you give me a little bit of a tiny little feature, please? And Apple's like, get out of here, kid, you bug me. And we're like, well, what if we come up with these features and everybody just starts using the podcast index, which some people call podcasting 2.0. And eventually, if we all start using this, the tail will wag the dog and Apple will have to use our features. So it's one of those things that it's off the ground, it's running, it's getting some news. And I like the idea. And then another part of it is being able to, if you go to newpodcastapps.com and you're into cryptocurrency, you can actually set it up so that the longer I listen to your show, the more Satoshis, which is this like micro payment of a Bitcoin, goes to the actual podcaster. And I'm actually, if I look at this right now, I think I have $39 in money.
Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah, I was like, because I haven't really been promoting it. I forget the name of the Stripe or Stash or something with a Strike. There we go. So if I go into Strike, I have, according to this, that's not the app I was looking for. There's another one. But it's, I haven't really promoted it a lot, but I'm getting some people streaming money to me. And that's the one thing that's missing right now. Adam is working on this. I've told Adam, I said, please get me in contact with his wife, Tina. And Eric, who's another team member, I'm like, I'm a teacher. I've got, a history of documentation. And also, I jokingly say, I am Gene's mom because I'm the guy that went over there and broke everything. Because I kind of have a technical background, but I'm not a coder. So I would be, I think, a good candidate to go, look, if it makes sense to me, it will probably make sense to the average podcast. Or at least I have a pretty good idea of the technical level, working in tech support of that. So it's got a long way to go yet. I will say that. But yeah, it brings new features and benefits to podcasting, as Daniel's saying here, making podcasting better for podcasters. I would love the idea if Bitcoin really took off. Boy, say goodbye to advertising. Not that we don't love advertisers, Dan and Mark, but it would be great about it. So that would be fun too.
It's not sustainable. Getting users to pay for things. We've made some progress with Patreon and all those other pieces, but there's very few people like our awesome supporters here. The folks that support me on Patreon are pretty incredible that they'd even do that. The majority, the lion's share of people will not support things that way. They're going to have to be ad supported. That's just, it's been a model that's been around for 400 years. And it's just not, I don't think, Dave, it's going to change. So I think there'll always be advertising.
Yeah.
It's the nature of the beast in what we're doing here. There will always be influencers. Yeah, so I don't think that's going anywhere.
$36.05. So
what's the name of that? What's the name? That's a player?
This is something, and this is, again, one of those things where I go, this is an app called Zap that I'm able to see how many Satoshis I have. And then the other one they said, oh, you need to just install, I think it's Strike, not Stripe, like the payment processor, but yeah, Strike. Because I'm like, hey, this is cool. I would like to boost another podcast because all these people are boosting me. I'm like, well, let's return the favor. And I'm able to receive Satoshis, but I have yet to figure out how to give anybody any of this. And when you go to their documentation, there isn't any. So it's like, it's not that it's wrong. It's not that it's bad. They just, there's no, it's not ready for Gene's mom. So
I'm just saying there's always going to be a place for in
yeah.
in podcast advertising and influencing. There just is. It's just it's always going to be a spot where I think it's going to exist. So Dan, Mark, I wouldn't worry about it. That I think those are going to continue to be out there.
Yeah, as we start to wrap up here, the most recent version of Audacity is 3.02. It's worth upgrading to. They added a couple additional changes, one of which didn't work in 3.01 or 3.0.1. Version 3.0.2 doesn't fall into the new rules. So there you go. So that's the other thing. How do you cash out? Haven't figured that out either.
No, you'd have to do it through the blockchain somehow. So it would have to go out.
I mean, I've got, I forget the name of the thing, Coinbase. I have a Coinbase account.
Yeah.
So that's where I would throw it, I think, at this point. But I haven't got it. At this point, I've kind of treated this as, when it comes to not blockchain, Bitcoin, it's like, it's not something I'm looking to cash out. I'm like, this is, hopefully my retirement fund someday when it's worth $1 gazillion, if it is. But, so.
It doesn't hurt. The blockchain is not ready for this kind of stuff yet. Like, I mean, it's there. It kind of works, but
yeah, I think thousands and thousands, if not millions, of micropayments. I don't think they saw that coming.
No,
so that's what they're trying to build.
Yeah, the especially Bitcoin is not set up. Ethereum is making some big changes. I think they're moving to Ethereum 2.0 and they're making some big. They saw all this and they're adapting to it, but the crypto market, by the way, theaverageguy.tv/Coinbase, if you want to join over there, but you can't ignore it. It's going to be a thing. What the thing it's going to be is still like podcasting 2.0. It's still up for grabs. Like, what is this thing really going to be?
Daniel says Twitter's interested in Bitcoin via Lightning Network, which is what they're using over there at podcasting 2.0. I expect we'll see much simpler options very soon. Yeah, that everybody's all kind of said, hey, this is we need something for the non-completely nerding out people. So
there's a lot of things wrong with crypto, from a regulatory standpoint, from a technology standpoint. It's still a learning space. We're still figuring things out for sure.
Yeah. But thanks to the chat room and thanks to the awesome supporters, thanks to Dan and Mark. And we will be back here next Saturday, 10:30. I'll have to look and see. Obviously, sometime in August, I won't be here because I'll be at Podcast Movement, which is coming up very soon. So that'll be a week when we'll be off. But should be fun. Really looking forward to Podcast Movement. So
yeah, should be fun. I'm not going, but it should be fun. All right, we'll see you guys next week.
See you everybody later. Take care.